What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Julian Fera from Photos Fera here with another tips and tricks video. I got some good feedback on the first one, guys, so I figured I would share another one sooner than later for you. Today we're going to focus on the RGB curves in Lightroom and or in Photoshop. A lot of people use the curve panel realizing that it's a very powerful tool. It can be used to increase or decrease contrast, add light to an image, decrease light, change the tonal values of colors, color grade the image, change the white balance of your image. But what does the RGB channel do? What do the red, green, and blue channels do? Well, a lot of people want to use the tone curves, but they're scared and there's a lot of adjustment needed. So they do it with trial and error. I'm here to tell you guys don't need to be scared to use the RGB curve. In fact, they're so powerful you can color grade your entire image just using that tone curve. So I'm going to try and make this as easy for you guys to understand as possible. If you have any questions after the video, you could submit an image to me, ask me a question, I'll be happy to answer. So without further ado, let's jump into Lightroom, guys. Okay guys, so now we're in Lightroom and we're going to get the tutorial started. So when you open up Lightroom, most of the time you'll end up in your library tab at the top over here. To find the tone curve, make sure you have an image selected and you go into the develop module. When you go into the develop module, you'll be presented with a series of panes on the right of your screen. Click the tone curve pane. Tone curve will open. If you've never used the tone curve before, chances are you're going to be greeted with this type of curve and this type of setting on the tone curve screen. Let me just zoom in so you guys can see a little bit better. Now, I always suggest going to the little point over here. Click to edit point curve. When you click that, you'll be able to select your own points on the curve. Okay, for instance, 1, 2, 3, and you'll be able to make adjustments as you want on the curve. Now, once we're in there, we have to understand how the tone curve works and what it all means. Otherwise, we're making adjustments that really mean nothing. You can see that the tone curve is split up into sections. If we look at it, we have a section here, a section here, a section here, and a section here. Well, it's very easy to understand. The bottom left of the graph, or the leftmost part of the image, represents the blacks or darkest parts of the image. As we select a little bit further in, over here in this area, we're talking about the shadow area of the image. These represents the shadows. This area over here represents the midtones of the image. This is the midtones. This area over here represents the highlights of the image. This is all the highlights. And the most right area of the graph represents the whites in the image. Anything over here represents the whites. So just to make it a little bit more understandable, put a point right here. This would be darks. This would be shadows. This would be midtones. This would be highlights. This would be whites. Okay? Let's flatten the curve again. If you go over here, you have your RGB channel. Then you have red, green, and blue channels as well, which we'll get into a little bit later on in that tutorial. Let's just escape over there. Now, first of all, we need to understand how the tone curve works and what it all means. A lot of people probably wondering why the graph is, why the line is horizontal and not straight. Well, it's very simple to understand, and that's because this point over here is the bottom portion, is the blacks or darks, okay? And darks are 0%, as you can see by the numbers at the top. When I hover over the little point, you have the numbers. Black cannot be more than black. It's already the darkest color it could be. As I bring the point up, I'm adding in more white until I eventually hit 50%. 50% is gray, because 50% is gray. The bottom is completely black, dark. The middle is gray, 50%. As I keep introducing brightness, what happens? It becomes white. And then your line is to the top. We have white, because I've introduced so much white into the blacks that they're now white. If I bring back my graph down, my point all the way back down, black is now where it's supposed to be, black. The same thing happens to the whites. The whites are already 100% white, as you can see by the numbers on the right. Over here, it is 100% white. It can't be any brighter than it is because it's white. As I drag the slider, the point graph down, I bring white to 50% approximately, now it's gray. You're taking out the white, bringing white closer to gray. If I bring the point all the way down to the bottom of the graph, there's no more white in white. It becomes black. Now your line is at the bottom, straight. So, if I bring my black all the way to the middle and introduce gray on one end, and I bring my whites more towards black to the middle, what do we get? 50% gray. And that's how 50% gray works. That's why the line is diagonal and not horizontal. So I hope that makes sense. Just as a recap, so you understand how this color palette works and it makes it easier for you to tone your images. Look at this picture I copied and pasted and developed for you. RGB CMY. So red would be the opposite of cyan in the RGB tone curve. Green would be the opposite of magenta. Blue would be the opposite of yellow. So it's not necessarily the opposite, but if I take out a lot of red, it becomes cyan. If I take out green, it becomes magenta. Blue and white. So RGB CMY. If you remember these color combinations in your head or use a graph, when you're using your tone curve, it'll be that much easier. Let me show you an example. Let's look at this image. This is a very simple image, okay? Notice the greens, okay? If we zoom in, we have green over here, okay? This is a nice tree I took, rapidly green. Now, if we go to the green channel, okay, and we want to know the opposite of green is magenta. So let's say we take out, we put a point on the curve over here, okay, and this is representing our shadows. If we start dropping the graph, what happens? What are we introducing? Look at the colors. We take out green, what happens? We get magenta. If you guys are not sure where the point is on the graph, there's another little trick I can give you. Look at this little thing right here. Adjust point curve by dragging in the photo. If we click it and we hover along the image, it'll show us where on the tone curve the image lies. So look, if I go here, look on the graph on the right. This is the widermost area or highlight region of the graph. If I go to the blacks, where is it? It's at the bottom of the curve. If I go to where the tree branch is, it's in the shadows. If I click and go up or down, I can actually adjust right on the image. I don't need to know the points on the tone curve, okay? If I want to reset my tone curve, I go in, I right click, flatten curve. So, what does this all mean? Well, let's take another image for example. Let's take this image for example. Zoom out of it, okay? I want to tone this image, okay? Well, I know that there's some red and orange in the sky, so let's go to the red channel, okay? Here's the red channel. What's the opposite of red? Cyan. So, I know that this area, to me, looks like it's the highlights or whites. If you want to confirm that, click your point on the graph and see where it's bringing you. Okay, well, it's bringing us between highlights and whites. Perfect. So what I like to do is create points. I usually work with 3 points on my curves most of the time. 3 points per channel, okay? Now, I want to take some red out of the shadowy areas of this image, okay? So I want to drop the red. Sorry, let me delete that point. I want to drop the red just a bit, just a tad. What's happening? What is the opposite of red? Cyan. So, cyan is being introduced into this image. Then, I want to add a bit more red in my highlight parts over here. This is the highlight or white region. So I take the top point because that represents this area. I take my top point and I start dragging it up a bit to introduce some more of that red. And you can see in the image, more red is being introduced. Now we have the traditional S-curve on one of the color channels, okay? And already we've toned the image a great deal. Let's go into the RGB curve, which represents all the colors. Let's create 3 points. 1, 2, 3. And let's create some contrast and add a traditional S-curve. So we'll take the shadows and we'll drop them a bit, just a bit. The midtones, we'll adjust them a bit. And the highlights, we'll adjust them a tad, just a little more. Okay? Now we're creating contrast, the difference between dark and white. If we want to add a fade to the image where you want the blacks to be less crushed, go to the dark area of the image at the bottom, take the point and drag it up. Now you can see we're getting that fade that a lot of people tend to like this day and age. Fade. If you feel the tone curve added too much contrast, go back into your main adjustments, take the contrast tab and bring it back a tad and add in some of that contrast. Okay? So now we've created a little bit of an S-curve over here, not a big one, just a small one, okay? We've also started to adjust the red channel. Now, let's go into the green channel. If you have trouble understanding the colors, RGB, CMY. RGB, CMY. What's the opposite of green? Magenta. So you're gonna know that if I'm taking out green in my shadow areas, this quarter, what's gonna happen? You're gonna be adding in magenta. So let's try that. Let's add a point here in our shadows, take some out. What's happening? We're adding in magenta. We're taking out magenta in the shadows, but we're also affecting the rest of the tone curve. Let's add another point and adjust that. Bring that back up, bring it back up over here to balance this out. Bring a little more green over here, take a little more green out, add a little more green in the midtones. What's happening? We're balancing out the image while creating a traditional S-curve. Now let's go into the blue channel. Blue. What's the opposite of blue? Yellow. So let's create our points. 1, 2, 3. Let's go in the shadows over here and remove some blue in the shadows. This is going to warm up the image because we're going to introduce yellow into the image. Okay? Let's take our midtones, bring up the midtones and add a bit more blue. Look at the sky. Look at the sky. We're getting that nice cool blue mixed with a nice sunset red. Let's take our whites and add more blue there. If you want to add some more blue into the shadows or darks, take your uttermost point at the bottom left and drag it up. And if you look at the bottom of the image, you're going to see I'm now adding blue into my shadows, creating a nice soft contrast between cool and warm tones. Let's bring it back just a tad. Okay, so we haven't done much adjustment. We've adjusted the blue, we've adjusted the green, we've adjusted the red, and we've adjusted the RGB channel. As you can see, if we go to a before and after, just by adjusting that tone curve, there's a dramatic difference. Just look at the colors in the sky. Sorry about that. Look at the sky. There's dimension, drama, contrast now in the image. And all we've done is adjusted a tone curve. We have barely touched our basic tab. We haven't even touched HSL yet. This just goes to show you the immense power that the tone curves hold. They're full of power. It takes practice. This doesn't happen in 5 minutes, guys. The tone curve is a very delicate and balanced adjustment. You need to take your time. Don't forget, you can also use your adjust point curve by dragging in the photo. You don't want to learn where the darks are. You don't want to learn where the shadows are, the midtones, the highlights, the whites. Let me zoom in for you one more time. So, darks, shadows, midtones, highlights, whites. If you don't want to do that, click this point again, and as you bring it on the image, it'll show you on the tone curve where does this point in the image lie on your tone curve. Click and drag to make your adjustments, just like you would if you were on the graph. Keep in mind, guys, the tone curve can also be used to adjust skin tones. Very powerful, very powerful. Let me give you a separate example, okay? Here's an example of a portrait I took, okay, last year of my wife. Skin tones are actually very nice already. There's not much to do here. Let me start by adding a bit of contrast because I know that I'm going to take out contrast with the tone curve, okay? So let's say you want to add or fix your skin tones with your tone curve, okay? Not hard. Start off by going into your RGB channel and adding 3 points, creating your infamous S-curve. So add some contrast with the midtones and the highlights. Okay, just a bit of contrast, not a lot. just a bit. Maybe a bit of fade in the image just to give it a little extra pop. Okay, so already we've added some contrast. Now let's get into the RGB channels. Let's start with the red channel, okay? Once again, resort to the image. RGB CMY. Let's go into the red channel. So let's zoom in a bit. Just a tad. Just to see how the skin tones react to the RGB channel. Let's add 3 points on the red curve. Let's add 1 point here, 1 point here, and 1 point here. Keep in mind there's not much happening in this area of the red channel. So that means that there's not much red in the highlights and the white region of the graph. Most of the reds are in the darks, shadows, and the midtones. So if you ever want to delete a point that you added, you hover over the point, right click, and delete the control point. Let's take out some red from the skin. Just a tad. Just a little bit of the image. Take out some red. Sorry, not too much, from the shadows. And let's add a tad more in the midtones, okay? Okay. Now the skin is looking a little bit red, right? No problem. Let's continue. Let's get to the green channel. Get into the green channel and add your points. What is the opposite of green, guys? Magenta. Perfect. Let's take out a little bit more green over here. Just a tad. Just a tad. Let's add a little tad more, softening up those skin tones in the green, in the mid-tone. So what am I doing here? I'm adding greens into the mid-tone region. Here I am decreasing greens in the shadow region. Okay, effectively changing the skin tones. This is a trial and error? No, not anymore. Now you're understanding how the colors work and how they impact. Let's go to the blue channel. Let's add some points in the blue channel. So let's soften up the image. Let's take out some blue over here in the darks. And then let's go over here with this point and add in just a tad. Oh, maybe darken it a tad. Take out some blue because it's going to bring more of a yellow tone on her skin. Just a tad. Just a little bit. Here's the before and after. Before, after, before, after. Look at the dramatic difference in those skin tones, guys. Just with the RGB curve, what we've done. Before, after. Keep in mind, all we did was play with the tone curve. We haven't done anything else. We haven't raised the shadows, played with the highlights, made our adjustments, clarified it, added in some vibrance. We didn't do any of that. All we did was play with our tone curve. Controlled. We controlled it. Look at the massive difference that this has taken. Look at the before and after. It's amazing. We've color graded the image and we've added dynamic and contrast. Now, what do these numbers mean, okay? See these numbers at the top left? What do they mean? I'm going to make it easier for you by taking this image into Photoshop and using the curves in Photoshop to better explain what the 51.8 and the 50.2% mean so you understand. Bear with me, guys, the tutorial is almost over, okay? So let's go into Photoshop and take a look at this image together. What do these values mean on the tone curve so you could better understand how the actual tone curve is affecting the image, okay? So let's right click, edit in Adobe Photoshop CC 2019, okay? Now that we're in the Photoshop, we can open up a curves adjustment layer, okay? So adjustment, curves. Don't worry about the adjustment layers, guys. I'm going to explain all that to you in a later, okay? So how does this work? Well, basically the numbers that you've been seeing in Lightroom, those percentage numbers that I showed you over here, okay, are actually the input number and the output number on this graph. And what does that mean? Guys, very easy to understand. The input is the pixel you are picking on the graph. So right now I'm clicking a point right over here, okay? My input is 24, means that's pixel 24 on the graph. The output is how much I am raising or decreasing the brightness of that pixel. So look, I take this point, I drag it down, look at the output, it's going out. So pixel number 26 now has, sorry about that, pixel number 26, if I bring it down to 0, what happens? what happens? 0. Pixel number 26 now has full black. It's at 0. What if I bring it up to 50? Well, it's getting more white because I'm giving it an input of 50. And the more I raise it, the brighter that pixel will get till it gets to white. 200. What if I go to 255 on pixel number 26? So that's what this slider is doing. Okay? So if I take this and I drag this input like some people do, what's happening? Well, basically I'm picking the pixel on the graph. It's only getting darker because these are darker areas right here. And the input is staying at 0. So no matter how much I drag this pixel, it's just the different points on the graph. They're all at 0. No matter what I do, they're going to stay at 0. But if I raise the output of this, we start getting light. We start getting light in the image. Output is the range or brightness of the pixel. Input is the pixel chosen on the graph. The same goes for the points on the white point, the highlights. Output is input 255 because 255 is white and 0 is black. 50% gray is in the middle, right? So I take the whites, which is 255, and I bring the input down. Sorry, the output. Look at the output go down. If I bring an input of 255, meaning a full white pixel, down to 0, what happens? It gets black. I'm not sure if this makes sense, but if it does, I hope it helps you. If it doesn't, you can send me an email. You can visit my live channel, and I'd be happy to help you guys even more. Just keep in mind, guys, that the tone curve is a very powerful adjustment. Knowing how it works, understanding the balance of colors and RGB, CMY can help you guys greatly better your images. I showed you guys a simple adjustment and what we were able to do. So I hope that makes everything easier. I'm going to conclude the tutorial with that. I know it was a bit long, but it's not an easy topic to discuss in 5 minutes. So anybody looking for the tone curve or looking for explanations, this video is for you. Talk to you guys soon and have yourselves a great day.